Hi there, my name is Miss Bukuma and I am the lead teacher of psychology at Beckenham. So psychology is the study of the human mind and its behaviours, and we look at topics such as schizophrenia, relationships, psychopathology, OCD, mental health and so on and so forth. So I would say it's an amazing subject if you are inquisitive, if you want to understand more, if you want to understand why human beings do the things that they do. So the entry requirements for HABE are English and also maths at level 5 and above, and of course many sites previously don't do GCSE in psychology, so you're perfectly fine if you haven't studied psychology before. I would say just come with interest and come willing and learning and ready to learn. So it would be amazing if you pick psychology. It's a very popular subject, and hopefully look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you, bye.
So hello there, my name is Miss Bukuma. I am the lead teacher of psychology, and I will be delivering this short mini series for you on psychology A-level at HABE and giving you a snippet of some of the topics we look at within psychology. So the aims of psychology. Psychology aims to understand the human mind scientifically. So it's trying to understand our human mind and why we do what we do. So that links on to my second point, which is it aims to explain the most fascinating human phenomenon. And I put an example there. I put a picture of a lady called Jeannie, and she is an example of a feral child. So a feral child is someone who was brought up with animals, and then at a later state, they've been found and been discovered by humans. And most times in this example, especially with Jeannie, what happens is psychologists try to study and interact with the individual, trying to understand more about them. And really the sole purpose of doing that is to find out what is the reason or what causes us to be human beings. Is it because of our biology, or is it because of our environment? So the best way to do that is actually studying these unique cases. It doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, studying these cases and finding out more about these individuals. So Jeannie is an example of that. Third one is to improve the life of others. So, for instance, we do a topic called psychopathology, which looks at OCD, phobias, and depression. And we use these explanations of these phenomenons and of these mental health illnesses to try to improve the life of individuals. So, for instance, if we've developed an explanation of depression, we can then use that explanation to then help people and treat people who suffer from depression. And then fourth one is to predict future human behavior. So if we know that one thing causes another thing, so if we know that, for instance, people develop depression because of the type of thoughts that they have, we know and we can make sure that if someone else were to maybe develop quite negative thoughts about themselves or about the world, we know that that could most likely lead them to have a lower mental health, or their mental well-being might be impacted by that. So we use the things that we discover to then try to predict future behavior. So psychology, who is it for? It's for the inquisitive. It's for the individual that wants to understand. It's for the person who says, why? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? Why are human beings like this? Why are we not like this? It's for the curious, the people who find themselves intrigued by human beings and intrigued by our behavior. And then the critical. So we look at various different theories, and what you have to do is to think about, to what extent is that theory true? So for instance, some people would argue that people have depression because of the type of thoughts that they have. But what about other individuals who would say they don't have negative thoughts, but they feel like they just feel low? So how great is an explanation that focuses just on people's thoughts and doesn't take into maybe their biology, or maybe their hormones, or maybe their experiences, or maybe trauma that they've experienced. So critical, you have to have a critical mind and be able to see the strengths and the weaknesses of the different things that we look at. So these are examples of students' work. So we do various within psychology. We have various types of questions. The topics are quite broad. So this was a response to an essay. This was when we were looking at different ways of representing your findings if you were to do research. So we do lots of times throughout the year where we create our own studies, we carry out those studies, and then we talk about what we found. And then this is where we looked at a bit of biopsychology, and we looked at different neurons that we have and the different types of neurons and how that the functions and how those neurons impact us. Okay, so we're going to do a short snippet, short introduction to schizophrenia. I thought it would be a really, really interesting mental health topic to look at. We do actually have a whole topic on schizophrenia. And I've jotted these images. You'll see these images as I continue. But some of these images have been created with someone or by someone who is suffering with schizophrenia. So think about, what does that show you about that person's state of mind? So starting off with a quick true or false, we've got 4 different statements. At this point, of course, you can just pause and think about what statement you believe is true or what statement you believe is false. So the first one says schizophrenia is when someone has a split personality. Is that true or false? Second one is all schizophrenics are violently aggressive. Third statement, people with schizophrenia are at least 10 times more likely than the general population to commit suicide. And then the last statement, schizophrenia is more common in women than in men. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to think about what statements you think are true and what statements are false. So the first statement is actually false. So schizophrenia is not when someone has a split personality. So that is another type of mental health illness that's called split personality disorder or multiple split personality. It goes by various different terms. However, schizophrenia, as we will relate to, is actually quite different. So the schizo aspect of schizophrenia does mean split, however, is believing that the person is split from reality and not split within themselves. The second one, schizophrenia are all violently aggressive. No, that's totally not the case. The third one is unfortunately true. So people with schizophrenia, because of some of the symptoms most likely, which we'll look at, have been found to be 10 times more likely than the general public to commit suicide. And then the fourth one is actually it's presented at equal levels in both men and women. So what is schizophrenia? So the artist, Brian, suffered from schizophrenia. In an attempt to portray the experience of the disorder, he reduced the medication on which he depended on for stability and painted 17 self-portraits as he descended into an inner world of torment. So I've just popped some of them. This is just 3 out of the 17, but the first one was early on when he initially started to reduce his medication. But as you can see by the one, so that is the one to the right, one to the right. However, the one on the left-hand side is when he continued to almost descend, in quote, into this world of torment. So when he had been on the medication for a number of time. And then the last one was when he was completely off the medication. So you can see how these images differ. The first one looks like reality. It looks like a face. It looks like a normal face, a standard face that you would see. How when you get to the second one, so the one to your left, it's quite different. It's a face, however, it's quite distorted. But you can still make out the tongue. You can still make out the eyes. You can still make out certain aspects, even though the mouth is actually at the top of the head, which is quite interesting. The tongue is at the top. However, you can still make out that's the face. Whereas when you get to the last one, so the one that's on the bottom right, you can see that he's totally descended. So he's almost lost his sense of reality completely. So think about, with this progress, what does that tell us about schizophrenia? So schizophrenia is called, so its definition is a type of psychosis characterized by profound disruption of cognition and emotion. In simple terms, it's a mental health disorder where someone has trouble telling the difference between real and unreal experiences, thinking logically, having normal emotional responses. It's the most common psychotic disorder. So a psychosis is an example of a disorder where the individual has trouble knowing what's reality and what isn't. Most people are diagnosed between 15 to 35, with men and women affected equally. So we're going to look at some symptoms. There are things such as negative symptoms, but we'll look at that when hopefully you join Psychology at HABE. But at the moment, we're just going to look at positive symptoms. So when you think of the word positive, we normally think of good, and you might think, how can some symptoms be called positive? But in this case, positive just means an excess or distortion of normal functioning. For instance, most of us are able to hear or to see or to feel, but for the person who has schizophrenia, there's an excess amount that they're able to hear, to the point that they might hear voices that aren't actually there. There's excess to what they're able to see, because they might see things that aren't there. So these are the few that we're just going to shortly look through. So first ones are hallucinations, which are distortions to our perceptions, distortion to our senses, so they can for instance, hear voices that aren't there, maybe distorted facial expressions. It can be related to any one of our senses, but the main report is that people report that they hear a voice or hear several voices. And unfortunately, like that picture to the top right, it can be ones that are really, really negative. So you can think about how might that link to, unfortunately, some of the suicide rates. Another positive symptom is delusions. So delusions are firmly held erroneous beliefs that are caused by distortion of reasoning or misinterpretation. So think, we all have beliefs, but this is a positive symptom because this is a distortion of the beliefs that we have. So there's various different types. It's really interesting. So delusions of grandeur. So this is the person believing that they're an important historical religious figure. So they might believe that, for instance, they're Jesus, or they might believe that they're Winston Churchill. Delusions of persecution. So they're believing that someone is perhaps out to get them in the government. Delusions of the body. They may feel like their body's under control, and maybe by aliens, maybe by people other than themselves. Delusions of thought. So they feel like so thought broadcasting, they feel like their thoughts, they're able to transmit their thoughts to somebody else, or thought insertion, where someone else, maybe an alien, maybe someone around them, is putting thoughts in their head. So their thoughts don't come from themselves. Other positive symptoms, so disorganized speech. So that means their ability to speak clearly becomes disorganized. The conversation might not make any sense. So I put just the image there. So I can't find the pickles. I need a knife to write my paper. It doesn't really make sense. We don't really understand what the person's trying to say. And then catatonic behavior, that's where the person has a reduced reaction to the immediate environment. So they could have rigid postures, aimless motor activity. So I've just put the two images at the bottom to show you that, where the person's sort of just rigid, holding their hands up rigidly, or the female's crouching down. So that's what we think of as catatonic behavior. So if you're doing in this lesson, so we'll actually look at a scenario. So you've got this scenario here, and we'll pick out where are the positive symptoms in this scenario, and how can we use those key terms to explain this particular example, which has Alfie and Violet. So we do a lot of looking at case studies, real case studies, or looking at hypothetical situations, or creating our own hypothetical situations to help us understand human beings and why they do what they do. So final words. That's all, folks, but it actually isn't. So that is only the beginning. I've tried my best to give you a quick summary. That is only the beginning to what it could be like studying psychology at Habe. So hopefully you found this mini lecture intriguing, and I look forward to meeting you in September. Thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing you too. Bye.